business, and I've got one too. You can't mind your business. What's the matter with you?
Welcome to the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and today I'm joined by our branding brainiac, Lorraine Kessler. Lorraine, we're going to dive into one of your favorite topics today, brand advertising.
Oh,
and
okay.
and discuss why it matters more than ever. No,
You took
not
me off guard.
the Eagles. Sorry.
No, I thought it was going to be like Italian cooking or something.
No, not wine,
Mhm.
not the Eagles.
Yeah.
Brand advertising. And we're also going to discuss one of your most recent favorite words, which is brand fame.
Yeah.
Okay, making things famous. But before we get there, let's touch on a fun brand whose theme is fame, and in this case, used misplaced fame as the punchline. Have you seen the new commercial for Skinny Pop with Jennifer Aniston?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, it premiered with the Oscars on March 2nd. And it was a simple ad. It showed the logo pretty much the entire time. And it had all the actors eating out of the bag and making it the distraction and then the resulting punchline. And I just thought what made this a great commercial is that, you know, Jennifer Aniston is truly the famous one, and she's not even acknowledged. They can't spell her name. They don't know who she is. And of course, everyone's all about the Skinny Pop. So why don't we see more commercials like this?
I don't know, because this is, I think because I don't know, but I will say this. You have so many simple things done so well. The copy is ingenious. The whole concept is ingenious, right?
Yeah.
And then the copy, the actual scripting of the spot is great. And I think most importantly, the casting. I mean, Jennifer Aniston is just naturally someone people like. She's adorable. I think she exudes kind of an awkward vulnerability, as pretty as she is, as cute as she is. She's like the girl next door who doesn't really quite have all the confidence, you know. And so you want to pay attention to her. She just glistens on screen too. And then the other actors are fantastic. I mean, they're so freaking good on how they can't spell her name. They misspelling her name. And she's just trying to be patient, but is confused. So it's really great. And at the end, you know, they recognize the product, the Skinny Pop, more than Jennifer Aniston. So I would just say, well done to this agency. Brilliant spot, simple, no special effects, you know, no elaborate kind of storytelling, pretty simple, stays very narrow, very tight, and it's just a great spot.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's a good way to kick off our episode this week.
Yeah.
And to the extent we're going to cover any brand news this week, because we have a multifaceted topic to cover. So, Lorraine, we live in a world today where consumers are faced with the most number of products ever, right? And services.
Yeah.
And with all this noise, it's crucial for a brand to take the necessary steps to stand out among all the competitors rather than blending into the crowd. You know, we always talk about the copycat thing. You always say, if I touch my head, someone else is going to touch their head.
Mimic.
As Jack Trout wrote in Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind, getting noticed is getting tougher. And that was in what year? 1981.
Yeah.
When the book came out. So before you launch your newest and your latest product into the market, or before you go to the next step in your advertising efforts, you need to first ensure you have a well-established position. That's what Jack Trout taught us. That's what we teach. That's why I have the words behind me that we do. A position is a unique, differentiated idea that sets your product, service, company apart from the competition. So, Lorraine, we do this all the time. We've talked about it, our appreciative discovery, but let's revisit the basics here in season 3 so that any new listeners who are joining us can understand the concept of position. And then we'll get to the idea of brand positioning, brand advertising, and making your brand famous, which are all basically interrelated.
Well, I think what Trout tries to, does his entire work is laying out this premise that positioning, finding an idea that differentiates you in a meaningful way in the mind of your target audience is upstream from branding. It is the first strategic choice you have to make. How is my company, product, service, how am I, if I'm a personality, different in a meaningful way that will appeal to the audience I most want to cultivate or I have the greatest opportunity to cultivate? And when we've often said that of these two, differentiation and being meaningful is about relevance.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to say it's the R&D of a position is relevance and differentiation. And relevance always comes first. Because if your idea isn't meaningful or important to a sizable audience, then you have a meaningless difference. So we don't want a meaningless difference. We want a meaningful difference. So you have to say, how important is this idea and to how many people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the object is to make a profit at the end of the day. Now, I also strategically, ideas can be brilliantly brilliant, but they're pretty boring. I mean, it's like kills germs. That's a strategic positioning idea. Better driving experience, strategic idea. Overnight delivery, strategic idea. Prebiotic soda, we talked about in our last episode. These are pretty boring on their own. So what really has to come into play is once you have the idea and it does maximize the distance between your product, service, whatever, and competitive offerings, and that there's a certain amount of people who care a lot about this idea, then all you have to say is, how do we communicate this, right? And I would say that how the idea is communicated can turn the idea to gold or dust. It absolutely, this is where the creative is so important. It's the mercurial magic formula that takes into account things like the name of the product, the slogans or the words you use, the logo and how it looks, the personality of the brand, how you might personify it. And if you do all these things really well, then the creative actually becomes a benefit of the brand and a benefit of the differentiation. So, when you think about some ideas, overnight delivery, what made that fly? Well, you had this really super fast talking guy, and the slogan was, when it absolutely has to be there overnight. Look at all the emotion in that. When it absolutely has to be there overnight. A lot of words. You could have just said when it has to be there overnight. Not as important, not as good. So there's just such artistry in how the creative melds with the idea to make it fly and make it sing. And I often think like Nike, and they've been having some troubles lately, but their famous "Just Do It" campaign is less about the slogan, in my opinion. I mean, they got that seeded because they have $250 million when they were launching to be able to say that. But I think it was the association, the personification with Michael Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
And it made people think, well, maybe with these shoes, I can be like Michael Jordan. I might run faster. I might jump higher.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think they ought to get back to some A-list athletes in their advertising, relevant today, to kind of get that energy and that, chutzpah going again. Because I think they've kind of lost it a little bit. But anyway, it's this artistry part. And we talked about in the last, this Jennifer Aniston spot with Skinny Pop, how brilliant that is, how beautiful it was written. That's where ideas really fly. Is you could take the best idea, like I said, and it's going to turn to dust if it's not communicated in a way that has artistry and creativity and engages.
Very good. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we know if you have something unique or different to offer, consumers are going to take notice.
Right.
Whether or not they choose it or not, that's part of the deal, is you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to win it with everyone. But that alone isn't enough to succeed in our overly communicated environment that we have
Right.
today.
Right.
So once you establish a position, you need to then own the idea in the mind, or it's just a boardroom idea, right?
Right.
And that's where the brand advertising comes in, and that's where you play the game, actually.
Right.
So the problem we're seeing today is that most marketers, and a lot that come to us, they're entirely focused on the short-term transactional marketing tactics, and they lose sight of the importance of an effective long-term strategy.
Right.
So Lorraine, explain to our listening audience why focusing on short-term transactional tactics alone may not be the most effective route for the long haul.
Well, yeah, and I'll begin with what I think is the core problem is that people are seduced
Mhm.
by these metrics that they can get very quickly from a Google campaign, an email campaign, opens, clicks. But all of those can be meaningless in the long run if they don't add up to long-term profitable sales. So, we've long thought this, and it's no different than in business when American business is said to think only quarter to quarter. And these are diseases of the mind, you
Mhm.
know. And thankfully, there's a new book out, and it's called The Long and the Short of It, by Les Binet and Peter Field, that after extensive research proves that brand advertising, what I would call indirect, long term, indirect brand advertising versus transactional short term activation advertising designed to get a sale now, it shows that short term activation marketing does not apply to long term success. In other words, it doesn't add up. And you can just use your common sense and say, how many products have you ordered on Amazon or off a Facebook ad because it solved a problem rationally? It had a rational appeal. Hey, here's how you can heat a room with this little, small thing you plug in and it'll heat your room affordably. Can't even remember the name. I bought two of them. I don't remember the name, right? How many of those products have people bought? Quite a bit. So there's no brand value. It's like it's here today, gone tomorrow. Now, conversely, long-term brand marketing, which is more indirect, and I'll talk about that a little bit, does affect short-term sales, but the reverse is not true. So that's kind of an interesting finding. So if you have a brand, it can create lift, what we like to call lift, on any short-term campaigns that you're running. So the key is to run these together in the
Yeah.
right balance, to have a balance between transactional and branding and understand that they do different things. Brand creates trust, it's reliability plus delight equals trust. That's what brand designed to do. Transactional doesn't do that. Transactional says, hey, here's this product, solves this problem. This is why you need it. This is how your life won't be great if you don't have it. Here's the gain, here's the loss, buy it now. But for that greater emotional connection, that greater belief, that trust plus delight, reliability, and just an emotional connection, you need brand marketing. So you need a balance. Now the problem is, and this has always been a problem as long I started in the business in 1981 when the book Positioning first was published, and it was handed to me by my then boss, and it changed my way of thinking forever. But the problem is we're always so reticent to say to clients, brand marketing has to be measured differently,
Mhm.
right? You have to have a long view. You
Mhm.
have to see the big picture. So we have a problem having a balanced scorecard because our scorecard is overly tilted towards these things that are real quick hits and give us dopamine and we feel great about. But they may not be adding up, and that's the problem of the seduction.
Yep. Well, we know the short-term efforts might be beneficial. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
I were selling a gazillion units on Amazon, great. But you just showed testimony of the fact that you don't even know what those were named. So every time that someone goes to buy one of those things, there's the potential of having other players in the market.
Sure.
So
And
not
more
only,
so because Amazon will serve you up
yeah,
all the all the alternates, right?
Yeah.
All the substitutes.
Yep. And they're going to do it based on their algorithms. So they don't even care about anybody looking over it. They
Mm-hmm.
want best price plus best reviews plus best service from whoever's fulfilling it. Boom. That's when you get an Amazon best recommendation, right? Well,
Right.
that can shift very quickly. And now you have nothing to stand on because no one remembers what your brand is.
That's right.
So, the other thing when we say transactional marketing, we're talking about those things that are short plays that don't do much in the way of brand building.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think of paid search, right?
Yeah.
You go, you search, you find something, you go and buy it. You're not buying it typically based on brand, because if you knew the brand already, you'd get there much faster,
Right.
right? Because
Right.
you're now typing the brand versus either the category or a description of your problem or whatever it might be.
Right.
So I think what happens is marketers are told to steer clear of brand advertising because it's a process that doesn't produce that immediate result,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
I would disagree, even though they're told this. If the idea is right, it can go crazy. Look at Poppy. We were talking about that on the last episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Poppy does the Super Bowl ad. I had never heard of them before. As you said, it got us to trial.
Mm-hmm.
And then now I like Doc Pop as favorite flavor. If I'm going to drink anything other than water and coffee, I'm going to go get myself a Doc Pop. So that was because they did good brand advertising. They
Right.
had a short-term play, but Poppy now is in my head, not, oh, I drank a healthy soda. I don't even remember what it was, but now that is in my mind. So the
Right.
two can live together is my point,
Right.
right? You don't have to sell your soul to Amazon, and you don't have to sell your soul to short transactional paid search, things like that. You can do both, and that's probably the big story here.
Right.
But you
The
have to
problem
do
is the problem
cool.
is many marketers, when they hear brand advertising, they think dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to spend a lot more money, and look at all the sales I'm getting. What they don't realize is they're in a very vulnerable position
Mm-hmm.
of being substituted or even made irrelevant without that brand build. And so, we just have to get more confident as an agency of using research like this, it's in this book, to prove the point that if you're trying to build a business and business profitability long term, you're not going to get there by transactional short term marketing.
Yeah.
That
Well,
will, that,
and
you
what
know,
I was just about to ask you is there's also this notion of doing brand advertising correctly.
mhm,
So what I think has failed a lot of people is they look like at a lot of money spent for little return, but they've never looked at the fact that maybe the brand advertising they were doing wasn't actually building a brand.
yeah,
It was a series of disconnected messages that never add up in the brain, which brings us back to positioning, which we started out with.
right.
So share with our listeners what it looks like to do brand advertising correctly, and maybe provide some examples if you have them.
All right. Well, I think to do it correctly is to understand it operates a little differently, right, than um, a direct message, and then you buy the product.
Mm-hmm.
It works indirect. So let me give you an example. It's kind of a crazy example of this. But if I say to you, I am funny,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the stimulus, your response could be, no, you're not, and you're gone,
Yeah.
right? Well, I don't find you funny. I remember someone telling me once, and I'm sure my face showed it, I'm a very smart person. And I know my face was like, really? I don't think so. So you've already discredited yourself. So brand advertising can't work in a direct way that a transactional marketing can. That's rational and it says this is this product, this is what it does, this is why you should buy it. So how it would work is I tell you a joke, or we have a conversation, and through that conversation, you find a lot of things I say as being funny. You laugh and you say, God, she's so funny, right? because brand advertising believes in the premise that what you discover for yourself is better than what I tell you. So that's the indirectness of it. And so what happens when that happens, you come again. If you want to meet with me again, you're like, oh my God, this will be fun because she's funny. Because I discovered that about her, not because she told me she was funny and I had to believe it. So I think that kind of is a little theoretical, but what it does is when you understand there's a different end to the customer, and it's emotionally based too. It has to tie to core emotions, things that you want, like these 5 great motivators of pride or wanting to be emulated or want others to emulate you, or success and looking successful and all these other emotions. Those have to be in the brand. That's very hard to put into a rational buy now kind of situation. And the brands that do this really well, and we go back to that, how do I tell the story of this difference with an artful way? Some of the brands that have created fame, I mean, they're famous for the way they've advertised. You think about Mean Joe Green and Coca-Cola. Still, people talk about that, I mean, decades later. The Affleck duck took everyone by surprise. And if I'm not wrong, I think Flo came after Affleck, maybe.
Yep.
And then after Flo, they all started having
Liberty and
right.
the emu. Yep.
Like Mayhem. Can You Hear Me Now? Which was Verizon. I think Uber Eats with Matthew McConaughey has the potential to be that kind of brand advertising that pleases people. And what's the discovery in that? Well, Uber now delivers food, and it's fun. They made it fun. So I'm thinking Uber Eats is kind of cool. So, when you have those feelings, I mean, at the end of the day, a brand is a gut impression. It doesn't reside in the system 2 intellectual part of the brain. It's very system 1. And so the other thing and this is what's hard for clients, but every brand that's built, the recipe is constancy and consistency. You mentioned something about some people think they're doing brand advertising, but every message is random. Yeah. Well, you can't count on the audience with everything that's going on in their life to tie all these unstrung pearls together. You have to tie them, the necklace has to hang. So you need to have the same message repeated over and over and over and over again, artfully, not in some boring way. And you need to have some constancy in how long you're in the market and how often. You can't just kind of come in and then jump out and then think people remember you 6 months. Look at what happened with the Super Bowl score we did in the last podcast. Yeah. I mean, we're only like a couple of weeks away and people don't even remember. So you've got to be constant in the market. That's a concept of recency. And you need to be consistent in the message. If it's working, stick with it. If it's not working, find one that will work and then stick with that.
So would you say that's your formula for fame is consistency and constancy?
Well, you got to have an idea, creative idea on how you.
No, understood. Once you have the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the Clydesdales, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can say it and everybody's going, oh, Budweiser, right? That synonymous kind of equivalence is because of great advertising that's been very constant, very consistent. They've told the story different ways, from a young little colt to an older one, but we all get it. So I think absolutely. And this is something any client, any size can do. And in fact, the smaller you are, the more consistent, and I think you need to be in your message, and you need to be as constant as you can afford to be. Because, you don't have a war chest maybe the size of some of the national brands we talk about, but you got to be as constant as you can be.
Yeah, and let's check our thinking then and show people the outcome of that. I always do this when I'm presenting on positioning, and I say, I'm going to give you a category right now, and you're not even thinking about these brands. But the moment I say the category, the brands are going to come to mind. And when I do that, that is the equivalent of having the fame that you're talking about.
Right.
Because you might not even use those products, but the brand names are famous enough that they're still on the top of your ladder. And the example that I always give is a very mundane category. And I go, toothpaste.
Yeah, Crest.
And Crest, Colgate are always the first two that pop out of the mind.
Right.
And I take that further with like sensitive toothpaste, and people connect that to
subcategories
or organic toothpaste, and they think of Tom's of Maine. But the point is that if I say athletic apparel, Nike's going to be at the top of my ladder. Right. So the point there being that in the consideration set, if your brand is famous, you're already on that ladder. And that is a goal right there.
Yeah, because if you're famous too, that means there's a lot of people who give me who made you famous, which gives me confidence, because we're very much a herd, right? We follow the herd. We get on the bandwagon. And so if everybody's running to Nike, and then that's an assurance to me that I can trust Nike.
Right. Now, some might point to Nike's short-term declines. You already mentioned them. Due to some of the up-and-comers and some of the bad moves that Nike has made. Would you say that means that brand advertising is losing its effectiveness, or do you point to other factors that have caused their decline?
I think that Nike's just lost a little bit of the magic. It's the blush is off the rose. They have a lot of competitors that are very similar. They're no longer kind of unique. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You can almost see a Nike article of clothing everywhere you shop. And so they have a problem of success, right? And success creates its own problems. And I think the hardest thing for a brand that goes from, we have these stages from introduction to growth to maturity. They're at a maturity stage. And athletic wear is at a maturity phase. I don't know if you've priced logoed like Nike, Adidas merchandise.
Yes.
I had to buy stuff for my grandson who's 13. The sweatpants were $90.
Yeah, it's
you
ridiculous.
You could buy a suit from Adams for that price.
I'll give Adam a call and let him know that.
It's crazy because it's just all about demand, right? Demand and supply. But but the problem is, I think, is that when you get to these mature categories and what have you, the fascination is easy to lose, and it's really hard. How do you get that back? And I would relate it to, what do you hear? I worked in the church for a long time. I think you are familiar with that. And we've worked with people who are divorced, right? And I remember hearing many times where one spouse, stepped out on the other. And you would hear this phrase, well, the magic just went out of the marriage. It's really hard to put the magic back in the marriage. It's really hard to put the magic back in a brand if it starts to lose it. So I think it's a time to reinvent, and I think Nike should regroup, reinvent, think about how do we do this? How do we adapt? And maybe it's a whole different brand that does something quite different than Nike. You let that ride, right? And that drives a lot of volume and sales and profit, but you create something totally new that isn't in the market yet.
Yep. Good. Well, we have a lot of smaller clients and prospects and nonprofits. Of course, they always point this out. We don't have enough money to do brand advertising. We're lucky if we get $50 to do a Facebook post. What's your advice for them regarding their cry of the limitation of resources? And be frank.
There is no easy nor kind answer to this question. The job of the marketer is to find the money first. That's the first job. You don't have the money, you got to find it. And you got to use your why. Why you do what you do, why it matters. If it's a nonprofit, what cause it is that you are really uniquely set up to solve. And you have to make investors your number one job. You got to get the money. You can't do anything without money. And so that's where you have to begin. Yeah. And you find the people who care a lot about what you do, who have some needs, and you have to, it's like police work. It's door to door, boots on the street, and you go and you ask, but you have a great presentation. a great proposal that they can't refuse. And that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and I always like to remind those organizations that, well, good news is you're talking to the right agency.
Yeah.
Because the one thing that positioning does is it tells you to say the same message over and over again.
Right.
And I'm not saying you repeat the same words, but you repeat the same idea.
Right.
And the benefit of that, and it's one of, my favorite words, is efficiency. If I don't have to come up with a new idea every time, one, it's freeing. Two, it's the most optimal spend of resources you could have, because every message, even if it's a $50 Facebook post, should be adding up in the prospect's mind. No exceptions.
Yeah.
The next post that you boost should be doing the same thing, and the next post and the next post, right?
Right.
So you may not be doing a big TV spot or a big radio run or have a big billboard up, but if all you're doing is social media, that message has to ring through. Your job is to figure out, how can I emotionally make it get attention? And two, what you were talking about is, how do I avoid boredom by the audience that's seeing it?
Yeah.
And the problem there is, we get bored with our own advertising, right?
Yeah.
But the audience doesn't necessarily get bored near as fast with it, because they don't see it as frequently. They don't live it every day.
Yeah.
So there's figuring out a balance of avoiding, don't even worry about your own boredom.
Yeah.
Because frankly, we always say branding is boring business, but be in tune with the audience to gauge, when is it become boring and when is it time to get new creative to say the same message. That's what we're talking about. And how do you emotionally capture the irrational side of the brain that's going to pop up and go, oh, I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
What's the message? Boom, it's in the brain.
Yeah. And if you work outside in, the thing that's most adaptive is the creative that you wrap your core idea around. The positioning idea, if it's a good idea based on our 4 filters, right? Company, it fits with your DNA and what you really care about, your mission, your vision. The competition, it maximizes the distance of competition. The customer, it maximizes relevance. And then lastly, context. It really fits the times. It should fit the times for a really fairly long time. Even technology. Apple created its beautiful, sleek, aesthetic design as its mojo, 40 years ago. So it's still relevant. So the position is the core. Think of it as the person. That doesn't have to change all the time. But the dress can change. The dress is the way you communicate that through advertising. So that is the most changeable part. And so you work outside in. And that's real important. But you hit it again. It's constancy, consistency. You have to do enough in the same way, with as much recency as possible, to begin to occupy some space in the mind of the customer.
Yep. Very good. Well, let's wrap up today's episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. Thank you, Lorraine, for joining us, as always. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe, subscribe some more.
And send a check to...
And send a check. That's Lorraine.
Yeah, we need the money first.
And then tell your friends, your colleagues, your family to do the same thing.
Right.
And until next time, have an amazing day.
Another for Monday.
Ain't nobody's business but my own. You say you